Chapter 11 Blood Will Tell. Ariel. Aggravated, Norbert snarled sharply when the tiny baby dragon Ebrion bit into her wing. Before anyone could stop it, the blue she-dragon whirled around, using her spiked tail to sweep the tiny dragon harshly away. Ariel and the others tensed as Ebrion was sent skidding roughly across the dragon enclosure.
Oi, that's enough, Norbert!
Hagrid yelled, taking out his wand.
Watch that spiked tail or you're going to take someone's eye out!
Standing back, Ariel watched with the others while Hagrid and his new dragon handler friend, a middle-aged man named Enno, went to check on Ebrion while Moondancer and Norbert returned to their previous game. Enno and Hagrid could barely speak a handful of phrases between each other, but they made do with shared interests and inventive arm gesticulations. Norbert hadn't grown much taller since they arrived in Westeros, but Ariel imagined she'd put on some muscle. It would be understandable too, considering the amount of time she spent wrestling against Moondancer. Bela's dragon was physically stronger despite her slower growth rates, but with 7 years to Norbert's 1, that was to be expected. Winded and defeated, Ebrion got back up, whining pitifully while Hagrid checked his bleeding leg. Ariel winced, but though Hagrid huffed in exasperation, he wasn't panicked, which was a good sign. Norbert hadn't warmed up to her new baby brother yet. At barely 3 weeks old, Ebrion was too young to fly or breathe fire, so he scrambled along the ground like a grumpy trip hazard between the legs of the other two, looking like a tiny black kitten in comparison to Norbert and Moondancer. Ariel leaned towards Princess Helena and continued the conversation that had been interrupted by the dragon scuffle. Everyone spoke in common tongue, and I did not understand them. Prince Aemon should use his words better than "show the king," she told Princess Helena frankly, glancing over at her brothers across the enclosure. The princess had acted bored all morning, as if this was just another Tuesday lesson observing dragons be dragons. Aegon had mentioned he'd rather be flying Sunfire than watching babies several times, though both brothers paid a bit more attention after Norbert's aggressive reaction to Ebrion. Seeming to sense her gaze, Aemon turned to catch her eye, and Ariel scowled. How was I to know what he meant? Ariel stressed the point. There was no need to push me into fire. After a year of handling Norbert, being unexpectedly set on fire wasn't anything Ariel couldn't handle. But still, so rude. She'd really liked that cloak. After Vhagar had burned her clothes away and they'd made it back to high tide, Ariel barely had time to put on a dress and a cloak that had her wand tucked safely in its pocket before they'd been summoned into the Hall of Nine. If she hadn't, both Ariel and the prince would have gotten a nasty surprise when he pushed her into the fireplace. Just like Daemon, Aemon too had assumed Ariel's spells came directly from her blood, and didn't quite understand the whole witches and wizards needs wands part of casting magic. Once the worst of her anger cooled off, Ariel could begrudgingly see where the misunderstanding came from too. Ariel had not used a wand against Vhagar after all. The day trip to the dragon enclosure was mostly an excuse to get away from the tensions back at high tide though, because they're foreigners with unnatural powers and no guaranteed loyalty. I highly discourage inviting such guests at court, Your Grace. What message does that send? I'd say a powerful one. It's the magic of old Valyria, and Lady Ariel isn't unburned. The Dragon Lords of old didn't come from Westeros either, and Lady Ariel has queer magic, but she used her spells to save my son. A betrothal would be a fitting way to resolve this. Has the girl bled yet? If you keep this up, they'll move beyond the wall next. Waiting with a betrothal or marriage according to the laws of their homeland was the main criteria they set before agreeing to join us to Westeros. Lady Ariel's already turned down the Prince of Pentos. Who wants to be next? Otto, don't you have a son around to suitable age? Well then, what about Rubius Hagrid? He's certainly of age, and there's several ladies of marriageable age we can offer for an alliance. He's 5 and 60 and set in his ways. He's not a lord. He owes no lands or authority. No, he's not a lord, but he's a good man who can handle dragons. Any son of his would be tall, strong, and strapping. Because he's got giant's blood. That's never been confirmed. Because he doesn't speak our language well enough to confirm it. Give Rubius Hagrid too much power and he'll grow into a threat. If you must, betroth the girl to a loyal lord and be done with it. The girl won't pose a threat once she's under her husband's command, and the blood of the unburned will run through their lawful offsprings. Did you not listen to a fucking word I said? Not until she's 7 and 10. If they posed a threat, it would be different, but Rubeus Hagrid and Lady Ariel have been nothing but great contributors to the realm. Rubeus Hagrid has a brand new way of hatching dragons, and Lady Ariel saved my son and Prince Aemon from dragonfire. Anyone else would be lavishly rewarded for their achievements, so why are we making it into a conflict? It's not unreasonable for them to learn our ways before tying themselves through something as binding as marriage. It shows good judgment. You might not understand the situation the way I do, as you here have journeyed further than Driftmark, but I sympathize with their situation. Would anyone here travel to Yeti and marry into a house before you knew their history or tongue? Now they're both already comfortably settled here at Driftmark, and we have good relations with both. Of course that's your standpoint, Lord Corlys. You're one of the benefactors. That does not make any of my claims less true. Since they kept failing to invite her to these discussions, Ariel had snuck in to listen to several heated arguments such as that from underneath her invisibility cloak. She might not have understood all the common tongue, but she'd got the gist of things. People were heavily debating herself and Hagrid, and she didn't like how many times the word marriage popped up either. The twins had noticed her steadily rising stress levels, so Bela suggested they go see the dragons instead. Now here they were, stuck with 2/3 of the royal procession after they decided to tag along. Princess Helena, Prince Aemon, Prince Aegon, Prince Ticaris, Prince Lucerys, Sir Eleanor, Sir Carl, 2 Kingsguard knights along with 4 Valyrian guards and a bunch of handlers. So much for their break for freedom. It should not have happened, Princess Helena answered. Aemon is willful and bold, and never more so than when he's fearful. Yet there is no excuse for endangering either of you. Thank you, Ariel said, because her apology was more sincere than the majority had been so far. Even Aemon had been too caught up in the wonder of fire-freezing magic to make his apology sound genuine. It's not the first time a pressing concern has ended in an ill-advised decision, though normally my younger brother's schemes affect himself alone. I hope you'll forgive Aemon his impulsiveness anyway. He set me on fire, Ariel reminded the princess. Would you be happy if he did that to you? That is an unfair comparison, as I cannot make fire harmless, Helena stated seriously, her shoulders tensing. If you throw both a cat and a raven from the top of a tower, the bird will fly, while the cat will go splat. And I'm the raven in this story. Aren't you? Helena asked matter-of-factly, her attention mostly focused on an ant strolling past the edge of her skirts. It was a regretful misunderstanding, but Mother hopes the new gown is to your liking. Ariel brushed down the silky but stiff fabric of the green gown she was wearing, a recompensation gift for all the clothes that had gotten burned. Sure. The dress is beautiful. It was very generous. It used to belong to Princess Helena and was the fanciest dress Ariel owned now, though it had the unfortunate side effect of making her look like a walking sliver in batter. Not that Ariel mentioned that. It seemed a petty thing to reject a gift just because someone she didn't like once wore the same colors on their school uniform. Still, Ariel wondered why Helena and her brothers constantly wore green. Initially, she'd assumed it was their house colors, because at official gatherings of several important families such as this, people were expected to wear sigils or representative clothes. Ariel and Hagrid had dusted off some old Hogwarts pins for the week, just like how all the Valarians wore their best blue for the royal stay at Driftmark. But in the case of Helena, Aemon and Aegon, it wasn't. House Targaryen was black and red, a palette King Viserys and Princess Rhaenyra stuck to, while Hightower was grey and white, such as the colors the Hand of the King kept wearing. But the Queen seemed to prefer dressing her children in her favourite green. Every day. It was a bit much actually. It suits you, Ariel, Rhaenyra agreed, glancing around the princess to address her. Rhaenyra's worry for Ebrion had lessened now that the baby dragon was back to jumping around, skulking after Moondancer for attention. The green gown brings out your eyes. Thank you, Ariel said, her cheeks heating. Maybe Sir Carl thought you looked pretty too. Or perchance you prefer gold, Princess Helena said distractedly. To bring forth your spirit. Ariel's face felt like it was on fire. Did Helena think she was ungrateful? It left her floundering for a distraction. No, this is good. Not to mention she already felt very overdressed for dragon handling, but all the other girls were in dresses as well. I heard Eren say you looked very pretty, Hariel, Bella said smugly. Eren is a stable boy, Rena admonished her sister. Bella giggled. But he's sweet. A stable boy, Rena hissed, and looked back over her shoulder to where Jacaerys stood with his father, brother and Sir Carl. I think Prince Jacaerys is much sweeter. Yes, Bella agreed with a wide smile. The prince is so handsome. It was true, Jacaerys was cute as a button, but it was weird hearing the twins talk like that about their cousin. By now, Hariel knew to roll with though. It was just one of the many things people did differently here. Such as how Lord and Lady Celticar were married, but also cousins, and no one thought that gross. Hagrid had been less surprised than Hariel to learn this, and mentioned that it happened in some of the bigoted pureblood families like the Blacks, back home as well. He'd gotten all gloomy and tight-lipped afterwards, leaving Hariel nauseously picturing a blasphemous reality where she was made to marry Dudley. Some days, it was as if all they spoke about here was finding a fiancé, marriage, or preparing for marriage. The blatant scrutiny over appearance was something Hariel had felt herself too, where few were shy to mention how her scar damaged her marriage prospects, at least in the beginning. Come to think about it, she hadn't heard that as much of late. Was that good or bad though? She couldn't tell if it was for the better or worse that people had begun overlooking her scar. Either option made her nervous, though at least there hadn't been another Prince Regio incident. In these parts, marriage was first and foremost about securing the best possible future than anything else. The same way Hariel had gone to school to get a good job, here girls were left seeking out advantageous marriages, which meant most marriages were hardly about falling in love. It was about security. The constant stress over survival was prevalent throughout every social class, and though she'd initially been really put off by their old-fashioned ways, by now Hariel had seen enough of this harsh world to understand why. She knew intimately how difficult it could be to meet ends meet, and Hariel had both Hagrid and magic to ease their everyday lives along. Even back in the fishing town, her friend Vera had hoped to secure a marriage with a boy from a good farm, not because she liked him, or even knew him, but because she was terrified she'd starve during winter the same way an aunt of hers had when she'd married poorly. Finding a husband was what most girls around here, or anywhere, talked about, while Hariel herself was more likely to balk at the very mention of marriage, though at the same time she didn't want to make enemies either. Surely it wouldn't be anytime soon. Hariel was a kid. But even when the day came, would it matter who she married? Sure, there was talk of storybook romances and dashing chivalry, but the way Rena had described Eren as just a stable boy wasn't exactly promising, seeing as Eren was excellent with horses, cute and polite. Hariel understood perfectly well it wasn't lacking gold coffers Rena took offense to. The topic made Hariel extremely embarrassed too, but seeing how early people got married around here, Lady Messi was only 15, and Damon was 16 when he married his first wife Ray Royce. Made her wonder if Sir Carl might have a fiancé too. Hariel glanced speculatively over the corner of her eye, catching the handsome knight smiling with Sir Lenor while Prince Lucerys talked with energetic arm gesticulations. Bloody hell, but what if Sir Carl was already married?
Oi, Hariel,
Hagrid called, interrupting her train of thoughts. Yes?
Could you feed northwards? With all these people watching, we don't want any competition between her and Moondancer.
Of course, Hariel answered and excused herself from the other girls. She went to fetch her cloak from the carriages, but her path was blocked by the king's guard who'd been trailing them all morning. The handsome white knight in shining armor was usually the Queen's shadow, but today he was tasked with guarding her children during the outing. Excuse me, Hariel said, but when she tried to walk around him, Sir Christian held up a hand to cut her off and said something in common tongue. Why is Sir Christian stopping me? Hariel asked the girls. Bela narrowed her eyes at the knight and spoke sternly. In response, Sir Christian looked to Princess Helena, maybe for her input. But the girl was preoccupied observing the march of the ants, so the knight went ahead and stepped aside. "Can I go now?" Hale asked Bela. "Heed the raven and drift in storms, roosting nests of eggshells," Helena murmured under her breath. Ariel blinked. Was that supposed to answer her question, or was it a completely unrelated matter? She'd noticed the princess had a habit of getting lost in her head, so it was probably that. "You may," Bela said, eyeing the princess uncertainly too. Being allowed to pass, Ariel went to cover her pretty green dress under a more robust black cloak, and climbed back down to the rocky sides to reach into the enclosure. It was along a stony beachside on a spacious terrain at the foot of a cliffside with caves of various sizes the dragons used as lairs. Norbert's head rose in anticipation when noticing Ariel approaching them.
"We'll give Moondancer a lamb, so can you take the meat for Norbert?"
Hagrid asked. "Sure," she retorted, already clutching her wand, and then switched her speech to Parsisaltan. "Come to me, Norbert," she called, and when Norbert still looked ready to fight Moondancer for the right to eat the lamb, she lifted her wand into the air. "Vermilius!" A jet of red sparks erupted from her wand, successfully distracting Norbert. "Come here." "But Mama has food!" Norbert complained, looking to Hagrid. "I have food too, Norbert," Ariel answered, feeling uncomfortable doing this in front of so many new spectators, their attention on herself instead of the dragons now. Sure, Bela, Reyna, the handlers and the Velaryon guards had seen this routine before, but there were several new eyes on them today. Sir Lenor lifted his son up on his shoulder to watch better, and Aegon and Aemond sure didn't seem bored anymore. Yet dragons didn't give a crap about who was observing, and Norbert would be cross if she didn't follow through with her promise now. "Come here, your big sister's got food and fun." Pointing her wand at a closed barrel, she charmed the bloody cow leg with Wingardium Leviosa, lifting it into the air. "Catch the prey," she dared Norbert, sending the leg flying. Spreading her wings wide, Norbert set off into the air after the meat, turning the meal into an airborne game of cat and mouse as the dragon chased the levitated limbs. Fortunately, there weren't any accidents. All the dragons had been fed properly when abruptly one of the larger ones showed up to the party. Ariel was just relieved it wasn't Vhagar, and with gleaming golden scales and pink wings, it was recognizable from a single glance. It was Sunfire, probably the prettiest dragon there was. Prince Aegon beamed, clapped his brother on the shoulder and went to meet his dragon, while Ariel heard Enno remark to Hagrid how Prince Aegon must have called Sunfire. If they are close enough, the dragons can sense it when their riders call on them. It's the most important part of the dragon bond, the thing that allows them to guide the dragons in the air. Observing an older dragon such as Sunfire greeting his human was fascinating, both how similar and different he behaved compared to when Daemon handled Caraxes. The red bloodworm was far more serpentine with slithering movements, while Sunfire was closer to a wild horse with bat wings, prone to throwing his head back, prancing proudly around and pawing the ground. The golden dragon had a very direct gaze that showed boldly its fierce spirit, while Caraxes was a coiled and slightly unhinged beast, unquestionably unsafe, but tethered back by a string until released, and then he exploded. A lot like Prince Daemon himself, actually. Ariel watched so closely she didn't notice when Aemond stepped into her path, cutting her off as she made her way to the twins. "That was unique to behold, Lady Ariel. Your magic is..." Aemond trailed off when no appropriate translation appeared, and his cheeks went pink. "We heard tales and gossip, but most believed them exaggerated. They're not." Ariel tensed, looking cautiously around for any nearby fireplaces, just in case. The hissing. "I remember you spoke like that to Vhagar too." Yes, I did." Aemond gestured to where the younger dragons had gathered together. "Do you do it to control Norbert?" "Control? No, I was speaking, conversing like we are now. If words were enough, Vhagar would not have cast fire that night," Ariel reminded him, and herself. It's not that Vhagar's fiery retribution had been unimaginable to Hariel. She'd known Vhagar was extremely dangerous and cranky, especially when her beauty sleep was disrupted. Yet Hariel hadn't expected the dragon to turn on her that way. Hariel had been overconfident, relying too much on Persisseltown, and was nearly killed for it. Maybe it was foolish to expect more of a monster, but it was just how she felt, and the betrayal stung. So truthfully, Hariel was far more angry at Vhagar than Aemond after that night. The prince had been under the misconception Hariel couldn't be hurt by fire because of blood magic, while Vhagar had meant to kill her. So Princess Helena might have been onto something with her tower metaphor. Vhagar had dropped Hariel expecting her to die from the fall, while Aemond had presumed her a bird. Both their assumptions were wrong, yet regardless of the end result, neither realized she was untrained to magic, nor that she hadn't flown on her own for a very long time. You can make things fly as well. I had not seen that before. I can, Ariel said, and then decided to get ahead of him before Aemond got any other bright ideas. But that is no reason to push me off a cliff. I'd never. Aemond caught onto Hariel's doubts from her expression alone. The fire was different, he insisted. You already showed that your spell could... I've apologized, and it will not happen again. In the awkward silence that followed, Hariel's attention returned to Aegon when he climbed onto Sunfire, slung his leg over the saddle in a well-practiced move and strapped himself to the dragon. Will Prince Aegon fly? She asked curiously, failing to beat back her burning jealousy. The prince put on gloves and pulled up the neck of his tunic. He is. Is Sunfire fast? Hale asked. Faster than sea smoke and very agile, Aemond answered. Aggressive too. Sunfire is much smaller than Caraxes, but very beautiful, Hariel said. It must be a joy to fly in the sun with such a dragon. Ugh, how Hariel missed flying. Sometimes she missed it so much it ached. Aegon is betrothed, Aemond stated, apropos of nothing. Why would he bring that up at all? Had someone asked about it? Why inform her? It's not like she cared. Oh. Bloody hell. Was a couple remarks about flying and pretty dragons all it took before people assumed she was crushing on the prince? Aegon was cute enough, but no Sir Carl. Maybe it wasn't so strange for Aemond to jump to that conclusion though. Aegon was a prince with a dragon, and perhaps that's how it usually went. At 4 and 10? Hariel shook her head. So young. Young? Aegon? He's almost a man grown. It's his duty to continue the family bloodline. Things are very, very different here than home, Hariel muttered, once again struck by how differently people treated marriages here. The more Hariel saw and heard, the more she kept comparing it to how people back home viewed education and occupations. Some people were really academic, like Hermione, constantly striving for years to receive top marks so one day they could get a prestigious, well-paid job. Others just wanted to do what they loved, so much so it might come at the expense of a good livelihood, while the majority probably made do with the first and best job they could get. As long as it got food on the table and shelter through winter, things were fine, leaving them to find an outlet for their true passions during their spare time instead. Except Hariel had to switch the word education with betrothal and job with marriage. She sighed. Who will Prince Aegon marry? Helena. What? Hariel's mind screeched to a complete halt. Who? I think I misunderstood you. Princess Helena. And yes, that's what she thought, he said. But she just couldn't make it fit. Surely it meant there was another Princess Helena who Hariel hadn't heard of yet. But then he made it absolutely impossible to misunderstand. Aegon will marry our sister. Excuse me? Hariel exclaimed, the horror making her feel like her ghost was vacating her body. Holy shit! Aegon was betrothed to his sister! Helena was to marry her brother! Gosh, what sort of place was this? Isn't that... The shock had struck her speechless. Isn't that illegal? Only for others, Aemon said, gesturing towards the Valyrians. We're the House of the Dragon. It's our duty to keep our Valyrian blood pure. Aren't you half Hightower? I'm the king's son. I know, but I was speaking of your mother. She is not your father's sister, or is she? Surely Hariel hadn't misunderstood that. Or was this another half-sibling rivalry situation again? Like what was going on between Princess Rhaenyra and Vislot? Was that why Daemon despised Alicent and her father Otto so much? Did they perhaps have the same mother? But only Viserys and Daemon had the same father while Alicent had Otto, making her some strange half-sister wife. The notion was gross, almost as much as the mental image of Aegon and Helaena. Hariel couldn't even form the thoughts without getting disgusted. No, she is not, Aemon admitted. My mother is a daughter of House Hightower. It is why Aegon and Helena's betrothal is important, to show we keep the bloodline pure. Pure? Is that what they called it? Was breathing the oxygen trapped in an airtight room pure? Or would it just get exhausted until there was nothing left and the person choked on their own thin breath? They needed fresh air, damn it! How could this world be that different from our own? Hariel had no words, yet Aemon acted as if it was completely normal. To be expected. Why can they marry, but not other siblings? She asked weakly. They're not of royal blood, Aemon said importantly. But marrying children born of brother and sister, they're what? Aemon's tone carried a clear warning. So he realized this was upsetting her then. Good. They can be very sick, Hariel said frankly. Maybe not at first, I'm not sure. I learned about this years ago, but I was told that over time, if it is done again and again, it weakens the... She struggled for words. The children of siblings have weaker bodies, weaker minds, weaker magic. For each generation, more and more, mistakes will show up. Babies born dead or being sick and die early. Some will have sickness for life too, because the parents are not meant to mix blood, so nature will make the children weaker to stop it. Why would you keep risking such a fate on your child? That's only the case in the lesser, Lady Potter. Preached by the faith to pacify the peasants, but House Targaryen can control dragons. We're above the commoners, and it strengthens our house to keep the dragon blood pure. But your blood is not of a dragon, it's human, Hariel reminded him. You're wrong, Aemon argued, making that unnerving big-eyed stare filled with anger. It's been the way of our family for centuries, and House Targaryen stands the strongest in the world. Your teacher lied, and you were stupid for believing him. Hariel dragged a hand through her hair. Centuries of sibling marriages, she asked, utterly stunned. And they wondered what happened to the magic of old. It was probably being run ragged on overtime trying to keep the inbred clan alive. Not always siblings, Prince Aemon corrected. That explains why all of you look so alike, Hariel said with dawning realization. It wasn't because of some strong genetic trait. It was basically the only genetic trait to pick from. Almost all, she amended. The twins took completely after the Valyrian side, and she'd almost forgotten about Sir Laenor's sons, who were all dark-haired and brown-eyed. But wait, Aemon couldn't be entirely right. Hariel had heard more than once that there had been several Valyrian and Targaryen marriages, that Aegon the Conqueror was half Valyrian too, and there had been more unions afterwards, so everyone could not be siblings. Though these Valyrian queens married into the royal family confused her too, because somehow the houses didn't share the same skin tones or features as she'd have expected back at home. Only their hair color and the purple eyes could be found across both houses. Aemon's purple gaze flickered towards his nephews. Yes, I do wonder why that is. His tone was bitingly sarcastic, but before Harold could ask what he meant, Aemon rushed the matter ahead. Well, how come you have so much dragon magic when your line is tainted? 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 Harold asked, eyes narrowing. I am not tainted! My parents were strong in magic. My father from a long line with strong magic and my mother the best witch their age. We did not need help from dragons to hold power. We are the power. Back home the magic of men win over dragons. 20 witches like me working together could kill Vhagar. How many pure Targaryens would it take to do the same? At least that made him shut up, leaving Aemon flushed and struggling to believe her claims as much as Hariel was struggling with his. Prince Aemon, Sir Christian called out, a hand on the hilt of his sword as he left Princess Helena and the twins in a hurry, speaking something else in a worried tone. No, Sir Christian, Aemon responded in common tongue, holding up a hand as if to stop him. The knight watched Hariel with direct suspicion, irking her pride. She lifted her chin to glare back coldly. Certainly he'd come running because he heard their argument and meant to protect the prince from the witch. Go figure. Why did Sir Christian jump to the conclusion that Hariel was a threat? During the last argument it was Aemon who'd pushed her into fire. Sir Laenor walked up behind the Kingsguard, eyeing Sir Christian with great dislike until the knight stepped aside. Hariel's brows climbed up her forehead. Sir Laenor's expression revealed far more than simple dislike. It was hatred. Is there a problem? Sir Laenor asked Hariel and Aemon, pointedly ignoring the knight as if the man had stopped existing. Only a disagreement, Aemon answered, shaking his head. The teachings of her homelands leaves a lot to be. He cut off and everyone looked up as a long shadow flickered above. And next Sunfire landed in a billow of dust right ahead of him. Prince Aegon put away the reins and stroked his dragon affectionately on the neck, smirking down at them from his high perch. And that's what it looks like when a true dragon rider handles their dragon, Aegon drawled teasingly, catching her eye and winking. Hariel startled. Caught up arguing over Targaryen incest practices with Aemon, she'd missed the older prince's entire flight on Sunfire. She'd even missed the takeoff. Damn it! Unaware of this, Aegon smirked cheekily at his little brother, a brow arcing unimpressed. I see you're working your usual charm, twat. Maybe you should step back. The lady looks like she's about to be ill.